Right now by Andrew Weissman and Bradley Moss, who have this document that Joyce Vance has just been discussing with Alex Wagner. It is a filing clearly intended to delay this case. It makes an argument that has no foundation in law, that there is a bias in the prosecution, and because there is a bias in the prosecution, a political bias, that therefore the crime wasn't committed, in effect. The outline of this bias comes in the middle of this filing on page 45, under the heading Special Counsel Coordination with the Biden Administration. And this demands that the judge allow Donald Trump to obtain communications with prosecution team members regarding the underlying investigation by members, relatives, or associates of the Biden administration. That word relatives of the Biden administration appears repeatedly in the communications that the Trump lawyers say they want. That seems to be a veiled reference to Hunter Biden. They certainly want to drag in relatives in this case as much as they possibly can. As that claim goes on about bias in this investigation, it refers to quotes that were in the New York Times from the Biden inner circle, so-called, saying that Biden, quote, said that he privately wanted the attorney general to act less like a ponderous judge and more like a prosecutor who was willing to take decisive action. That was before Jack Smith was named as a special prosecutor in this case. This pleading then insists that that leak of, not quotations, from Joe Biden to the New York Times proves that right there, Joe Biden was trying to initiate a prosecution of Donald Trump. And then in public statements that Joe Biden made himself, where he was basically saying that he was going to run for president, and that's how he was going to stop Donald Trump from becoming president again. The Trump lawyers are using those statements tonight, made on November 9th, 2022, to indicate some kind of political collusion going on here. They say at a press conference, Biden stated, "We just have to demonstrate that he will not take power if he does run. I'm making sure he, under legitimate efforts of our Constitution, does not become the next president again." That was interpreted by everyone at the time to mean Joe Biden was running for president. A week later, Joe Biden announced that he was running for president. In the Trump lawyers' view, this sequence of events supports President Trump's defense that the charges against him are politically motivated. Andrew Weissman, Bradley Moss joining us now. Andrew Weissman, if the charges against you are politically motivated, is that a defense in a criminal prosecution?
It is something that, with additional evidence, assuming you can support it, is an argument that you can make to the judge for something called selective prosecution or vindictive prosecution. It is decided by the court, not by a jury. And you would need to show that people who are similarly situated have not been charged, and that the reason that the person went forward, that you went forward and charged that person, was for impermissible reasons. It is a very, very hard thing to show and prove. Obviously, I think none of us have had a chance to really study the allegations here, but I think it's useful to sort of separate them into two buckets. There is a press release function of this document, as you said, starting with, talking about how he's doing in the polls, referencing all sorts of collusion and claims that are really just for his base. And if you were in front of a serious judge, all of that would be disregarded at best. I mean, you could have a judge who was actually annoyed that you were raising it. That's sort of, I think, a whole bunch of what's going on here. There are other things, though, that I'm more concerned about because of the forum that we're in front of Judge Cannon. And so this is something Bradley, I think, is going to have a lot to say about, because there are allegations here about wanting to essentially, it looks like, publicly reveal information that has been marked classified, and to really take the SEPA process, this is the way in which classified information is litigated, and to make it a public forum. That is the kind of thing that I would be surprised if Judge Cannon goes along with that. But if she does, I can see that being the kind of thing that gets appealed to the 11th Circuit. And then I just want to say one final thing that I do think is an argument that is serious, and unfortunately it's sort of buried in all of this detritus, which is that the defense says you should require the government in connection with its Brady obligations. That is, the government has an obligation to turn over to the defense any information that would tend to exculpate or impeach. That is a really important obligation that the government has. But the issue in the law is, what is the scope of that, of how much they're supposed to research? You can't go, if you're in New York, you can't be required to suddenly go to Seattle and look at, the tax authorities in Seattle about something unrelated to see, is there anything that could possibly be there? So the law restricts sort of what is the scope of the prosecution team that you have to be responsible for. And there, the law is very sort of unsettled in that different circuits have different rules, and the scope of that obligation is something that I think is a fair area for the parties to litigate and for a court to weigh in on, because you want to make sure that the government is scooping up all of the information that it could find that could possibly exculpate or impeach. So I think that's the one area where I'm sort of more inclined to think I'm interested in what the government responds, because I suspect we're going to hear that they've actually done that. They've gone to all of the logical places.
Yeah, to be clear, this is a motion to compel discovery. And Bradley Moss, as I was reading through it, I was thinking, can the government simply say, we already responded with that discovery, or we looked and there's nothing there?
Sure, absolutely. Part of their response, no doubt, will be to say, here's everything we did to find discoverable Brady information in compliance with our obligations. Here's how we define the scope. Here's why we concluded it should be defined that way. And here were the efforts we made to produce that information. But reading through this motion, I was thinking of the quote, when you don't have the facts, you argue the law. When you don't have the law, you argue the facts. We don't have either, you pound the table and you yell. That's what this motion is. It's a political talking point and narrative dressed up with legal arguments. They don't really expect, as far as I'm concerned, they don't expect to find this evidence of collusion if they were to get some of this extra discovery, trying to find Brady information in communications with the White House and Hunter Biden and anybody else that, the DOJ may have spoken to in the last 3 years. They want to drag the process out. That's their point with this, is to try to see if Judge Cannon will agree with them to expand the scope, to require some additional discovery, and to produce more information that would take longer to get through. That's their goal with this. I don't really think they expect to find a whole lot of interesting information. They just want this to take longer.
Bradley, one of the notes they have in here is their indication that Donald Trump still had a security clearance. They maintain that there's evidence through the Department of Energy that Donald Trump had a security clearance. How would that be in any way relevant to the illegal possession of classified material? People with security clearances have been prosecuted for taking this stuff home before.
Yeah, so let's get one thing really clear, and I keep seeing this in the Trump filing because it's driving me crazy. Presidents do not have security clearances. They are constitutionally exempt. You are the President of the United States. You are authorized to see anything and everything you want that is classified under executive order. So when Donald Trump became president and up until the day he left, he was authorized to access everything. He didn't go through the vetting that Andrew went through, that I went through, that any number of people have held security clearances go through. He didn't fill out security paperwork. He was automatically accessed. But of course, the government documents that the president was given access to these particular documents at this time because they have to track where things go. That's all that was. But they've concocted this theory that if he still had, quote unquote, a clearance post-presidency, it meant he was authorized to have these documents. No. Chelsea Manning had a clearance. She didn't have authorization to give out stuff. John Kiriakou had one. Harold Martin over at NSA, who was hoarding documents for years, they all held clearances. They were not allowed to take those documents and put them somewhere else. They were not allowed to store them at home, which is what Donald Trump effectively did. It's a non sequitur. It drives me crazy reading it. It's on page 42 of the brief for anyone who wants to go back and just, lose their mind.
Andrew Weissman, this question of the scope of the prosecution team, the Trump lawyers are saying the scope of this prosecution team includes, it goes all the way up to the President of the United States, and obviously includes the Attorney General, all of their relatives, according to the way they have pleaded this, and pretty much everyone else in government. I couldn't find a boundary anywhere to what they defined as the prosecution team.
That would be right, Lawrence. My quick list of what they wanted was all of the Department of Justice, all of the White House, all of the agencies in the intelligence community, the National Archives, and all of the Secret Service. So even Judge Cannon, I don't think will do that. And if she were, that would get reversed. What you're looking for is people who worked closely with the agents and prosecutors on the case from the beginning of the case till now. So if the case started, out before there was a special counsel, that group of people, you need to look for that. If the special counsel took over, you need to look for all of the stuff that the special counsel was doing. Let me give you an example. When I worked on the Enron case, we worked closely with the SEC. So our obligations included all documents in the possession of the SEC. And that I thought was fair for us to have to do that. And so that is really something that I think that you're going to hear from the government, that they've actually done this, so that this is a way overbroad request that's not that atypical for defense counsel. But I think Bradley makes the correct point. The goal here is to provide Judge Cannon with a fig leaf for delaying this case further. The May trial date there's no way in God's green earth that is going to happen. She's going to hear from the parties, she said, in March about the trial date. And the goal, I think, from the defense is to give her enough sort of plausible deniability to put that trial date off until after the general election.
Bradley Moss, one of the big smoking guns in this document about the collusion, the political collusion to bring this prosecution, is the fact that the Attorney General of the United States, they have discovered that the Attorney General of the United States authorized the search warrant of Donald Trump's home. Of course, we all discovered that at the same time when the Attorney General of the United States told the country that he did that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Look, there's a reason why the Attorney General was involved at that point, putting aside that there was no special counsel. These are some of the procedures that were put in place by Bill Barr and others in the aftermath of the problems that came up in 2016 and 2017 with Crossfire Hurricane, and some of the concerns about lower level people making politically controversial choices. And so they wanted to put more senior level accountability. Who else would you want at the Justice Department making that choice of authorizing a search warrant of the former president than the most politically accountable person at the Justice Department, the Attorney General? That's the one person you can hold to account. You can impeach that person if you wanted, if you're Congress. That's the way this is set up on purpose.
Attorneys Bradley Moss and Andrew Weissman, thank you very much for joining us in this breaking news coverage tonight. Really appreciate it.
Wow.
You're welcome.
Coming up, imagine walking into court and hearing the lawyer who you're paying say, I don't know how to try this case. That's exactly what Donald Trump heard his lawyer say today in the case of E. Jean Carroll versus Donald Trump in federal court. That's next. I don't know how to try this case, Your Honor. Imagine sitting in a courtroom and hearing the lawyer who you are paying say, I don't know how to try this case, Your Honor. Donald Trump heard his lawyer say that in the opening minutes of the case of E. Jean Carroll versus Donald J. Trump in federal court today in New York. Federal Judge Lewis Kaplan had ruled against the Trump lawyers in a series of objections with quick one-word rulings, overruled repeatedly. When every one of the Trump lawyers' pretrial objections was overruled, attorney Alina Habba said, I don't know how to try this case, Your Honor, to which the judge said, I have heard you, I have considered what you have to say, and I have ruled. That's it. In my courtroom, when the ruling is made, that is the end, not the beginning of argument. And that leaves Alina Habba as the current frontrunner for worst Trump lawyer to appear in court so far. Here's how it went when attorney Habba asked to not have a trial session on Thursday of this week so that Donald Trump could attend his third mother-in-law's funeral. Ms. Habba, we are asking again, Your Honor, for a brief one-day adjournment so my client can be here just like he flew at the wee hours of the night to be here today. The court, you said you're asking again for a brief one-day adjournment. That is the first time you've done that, notwithstanding statements made elsewhere. Ms. Habba, that's not true, Your Honor. The court, to the contrary, you asked me for a week's adjournment. I denied it. Then the judge said, I am not stopping him from being there. Donald Trump is not required to be in the courtroom at any time. He could go to the funeral, and he proved that to everyone today by leaving during the afternoon session and flying to New Hampshire while the court was still conducting a session. He could do the same thing on Thursday if he cares about his third mother-in-law's funeral as much as he cares about winning votes in New Hampshire. After assembling a civil jury of 9 members, Judge Kaplan explained that their job is only to decide how much money Donald Trump should pay E. Jean Carroll for defamation. The judge told the jury, the very first thing you need to know about this case is that, as I mentioned very briefly earlier, there have been previous proceedings relating to these events, including a previous jury trial. The jury in that case and other proceedings in this court already have determined some of the key facts about this dispute. Those facts that were definitively decided in the previous trial include the following. First, Mr. Trump, in fact, sexually abused Ms. Carroll by forcibly and without her consent inserting his fingers into her vagina. Second, Mr. Trump's June 21st and June 22nd statements were false. Ms. Carroll did not make up her claim of forcible sexual abuse. Third, Mr. Trump's June 21st and June 22nd, 2019 statements were defamatory. Mr. Trump when he made his statements, he knew that they were false. In her opening statement on behalf of E. Jean Carroll, attorney Sean Crowley told the jury, quote, you'll be asked to decide how much money Donald Trump should have to pay for what he's done. You'll also need to decide how much money he should pay to get him to stop doing it again. You'll hear how Donald Trump's defamatory lies about Ms. Carroll unleashed his followers to go after her online, to attack her character, to threaten her life. You'll see messages where people tell Ms. Carroll that she should go to jail, promising that they would rape her, threatening that she should die, all because she had the courage to speak out about what Donald Trump had done to her. Attorney Crowley pointed out that Donald Trump continues to publicly attack E. Jean Carroll, and without asking the jury for a specific amount of money, she did say, quote, we submit that the number should be significant, very significant. Donald Trump, after all, is a self-proclaimed billionaire. Attorney Crowley ended her opening statement with this. Members of the jury, it's time to tell Donald Trump that this is wrong. It's time to hold him accountable. It's time to show him that in our system of justice, no one is above the law, not even former presidents or real estate tycoons or billionaires. 25 years after sexually assaulting Ms. Carroll, Donald Trump defamed her for speaking up, and then he did it again and again. He keeps doing it even now. It's time to make him stop. It's time to make him pay clearly for what he's done, to pay enough to convince him once and for all not to do it again. In her opening statement to the jury, defending Donald Trump's lies about E. Jean Carroll, Alina Habba said that E. Jean Carroll, quote, is looking for you to give her a windfall because some people on social media said mean things about her. The judge had to stop Attorney Habba when she misstated the law and made other mistakes in her blatantly incompetent opening statement. In her last words to the jury, Attorney Habba said that the death threats Donald Trump's followers have issued to E. Jean Carroll are a normal thing. That was her phrase. Attorney Habba told the jury, the negative backlash that she purportedly suffered is simply a byproduct of a digital age and social media. When you put a story out, you will receive backlash. It's a normal thing that happens. But she wants you to pay and is claiming it's all because of his two statements. Joining us now is Faith Gay, former prosecutor for the Eastern District of New York. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. This is such a peculiar piece of litigation for us to watch at this point, since the real facts of it have been decided. This comes down to what we will see, will be shown to this jury, death threats, and the Trump defense simply saying, oh, those are just mean tweets.
Lawrence, a damages trial is always a nightmare for defendants, right? Because guilt is already established. Everything that the judge says is very typical. It's not just Mr. Trump who goes through this. The jury only has to decide how much E. Jean Carroll was victimized. And that doesn't fit so well with the narrative that Mr. Trump wants to put forward. He's just won the Iowa primary. He wants to come in and suggest that the big, bad establishment justice system is not on his side. But instead, we have 2 or 3 days ahead of us in which every word that comes out of the witnesses' mouths are going to be not how Mr. Trump was victimized, but instead how E. Jean Carroll was victimized. And that just doesn't work well for him. He's not going to be able to say in court that he doesn't know her, that he didn't do it, that he didn't assault her, that she was not radically hurt by this. Instead, the only defense he has is, oh, yes, I unleashed a torrent of violence against Ms. Carroll, and it doesn't really matter very much. That is a tough position to be in for his victimization theme.
And there wasn't anything, there were no objections during E. Jean Carroll's lawyer's opening statement when these threats were attributed to Donald Trump. There was no objection saying that you can't prove that, and there was nothing in the defense opening statement saying, you know, you can't prove that Donald Trump provoked these threats to her.
That's right. I mean, look, there is absolutely nothing, and these defense lawyers know it. There's nothing they can do except try to keep the number down here. And they know that's tough because on punitive damages, like we saw in Giuliani's trial, the punitive piece is where the jury gets to do what the heck they want to do. And again, these are not powerful people. Look at this 9-person jury. Now, they're anonymous to protect themselves. And of course, Judge Kaplan is going to try to keep them very protected, but they're regular folks. And they will get to say not just what an expert on damages, suggests that they should pay, but they get to decide what amount of money will make Mr. Trump stop. And that amount of money could be sky high, given how much he has always bragged about his net worth.
Yeah, especially since Sean Crowley, E. Jean Carroll's lawyer, pointed out to the jury that she said he sat in this courthouse this morning, and while he was sitting there, he posted more defamatory statements, more lies about Ms. Carroll. That's what he's doing in the courtroom while the jury is sitting there trying to do their job.
I think that's right. And of course, look at the optics in this courtroom today. This is the first time that Ms. Carroll and Mr. Trump have been in the same place in a long time. She sat with her back to him. She's a now elderly, thin woman and he's, glowering right behind her. The jury can't miss that this powerful man, the ex-president, who, by the way, defamed her while he was the president, needs to have something to stop him. And that number could be very big.
Attorney Faith Gay, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Coming up, Donald Trump inspired the lowest turnout of Republican voters in the Iowa caucuses in 24 years. To win the presidency, Donald Trump has to turn out at least 7 million more voters than he turned out last time. We'll get Simon Rosenberg's take on the Iowa caucuses next. Donald Trump got 56,260 votes last night, and that's about enough to win you a seat on the Boston City Council. But the tiny voter turnout for Donald Trump in Iowa did not prevent the political industrial complex, which very much includes cable news, from treating the Iowa caucus results as a big deal. Donald Trump won the Iowa caucuses last night by the lowest margin of any candidate in the history of the Iowa caucuses who already served as president. Of course, no president who was defeated in his reelection has ever returned to the Iowa caucuses 4 years later, asking to be president again. Donald Trump's return to Iowa inspired the lowest Republican turnout since 2000, and Donald Trump's total vote was only marginally higher than it was when he came in second in the Iowa caucuses in 2016. In 2016, Donald Trump got 45,427 votes in Iowa, inspired about only 10,000 more votes in his return to Iowa last night. Not a good sign for a candidate who lost to Joe Biden by 7 million votes in the last presidential election. Joining us now is Simon Rosenberg, longtime Democratic strategist and author of Hopium Chronicles on Substack. Simon, I've been waiting 24 hours now, a full 24 hours now, to hear your much more analytically authoritative reaction to the Iowa caucuses than anything I could say. Please, go.
Well, listen, what we talk about when I come on, Lawrence, is that there's been this basic dynamic in our politics since Dobbs happened in the spring of 2022, where Democrats keep overperforming expectations and Republicans continue to struggle. You saw that play out in special elections throughout 2022. You saw it play out in the general election in the battleground states where we did so much better than anybody anticipated. We've seen it play out again throughout all of 2023. We won the Virginia State House. We won the Wisconsin Supreme Court seat. We won in Ohio. We won in Colorado Springs and in Jacksonville. We kept overperforming and taking Republican things away from them because they continued to struggle to vote. Their voters weren't showing up. And that's what's happened now in early 2024. Again, we saw it in Iowa last night. And we also saw it tonight in Orlando in a special election, Republican seat where Democrats took away, in the land of Trump and DeSantis, we took away a House seat in Florida. In both cases, Republican turnout Republicans struggled. Republicans are struggling to turn out their voters. This has now been going on for 18 months. It's a big problem. We're going into 2024 with a lot of momentum. They're struggling and limping as they head into 2024.
And Simon, this is kind of the opposite of what we were seeing in 2016, where Donald Trump was kind of overperforming in the turnout models.
Yeah. Look, there was this idea of this hidden Trump vote, right? I mean, that was a big part of what we talked about in 2016, when really what happened in the general election is that Clinton was going to win, and then the FBI intervened, and her numbers cratered at the very end. There wasn't sort of a hidden special superpower that Donald Trump had. The election changed at the very end. What's happening now is that we have an awful lot of elections all across the country of every kind and shape and size where the same thing just keeps happening, where Democrats keep overperforming and Republicans struggle. If you were Ronna Romney McDaniel and you looked at that turnout last night in Iowa, you're incredibly worried about where the Republican Party is. I mean, they spent huge amounts of money. This was an all or nothing fight for all the candidates there. And barely, and they had a huge drop in turnout, as you pointed out, the lowest in 24 years. And what happened in Florida tonight was similar, right? This is the land of DeSantis and Trump. They have all the money in the world. Their candidate outspent our candidate 2-1 in this district, in a district that they held, and we still won tonight. So I just, as you and I have discussed, I mean, when I look at all this in every way possible, I would much rather be us than them as we head into 2024.
So there's going to be a tremendous amount of attention given to Donald Trump as he, marches through the primary schedule, whereas Joe Biden on those nights won't be getting any attention at all. Is there an advantage in a primary, the kind of primaries that Trump has, where he's obviously going to win all or most of them very easily, than the candidate who doesn't have any primaries at all to win?
Well, maybe. I mean, Joe Biden gets to be president, and Donald Trump is responding to that by being a defendant in trial after trial after trial. I mean, I'm of the mind that what he did today in New York, for example, is hurting him. I mean, this idea that there's any benefit for him to look like a criminal or be in constant, crosshairs of the courts and prosecutors, it's disastrous. We have one guy being president of the United States trying to solve our problems, the other guy trying to spend all of his time staying out of jail. And I think that over time, as people start to pay attention, this is going to be a much bigger problem for him. And frankly, there were two other bits of data that we saw out of Iowa in the last couple of days that confirm this. One is that in your poll that was released on the NBC News poll released on Sunday, Haley voters, which were 20% of the electorate last night, were asked who they would vote for in the general election, and 43% said Biden and only 22% said Trump, right? Far more Haley voters said they would vote for Biden than Trump. And then we also heard last night in the entrance polls that over 30% of Republican voters who voted in Iowa, a very conservative state, would find it disqualifying if Trump were to be convicted of a felony. And so you're already seeing warning signs that people are aware of his troubles. They are unhappy with him. He's an historically ugly and unattractive candidate, and that he's struggling to bring Republicans along. That's the central reason why they continue to struggle in these elections, I think, is because the Republican Party is unattractive even to Republican voters, and people are just not